At this time, I'd like to turn the call over to your host, Mr. Gene Amparano. Mr. Amparano, you.
Thank you, Rico. Welcome, everyone. This is a first of a series of webinars on the Highway Safety Manual. Today will be a 2-hour webinar. Going to convert to the next layout. And on your screen, the presentation should be coming up. We are providing closed captioning. Once the presentation is viewable, at the bottom of your screen on the lower right, you'll see a toggle for full screen view. You can toggle between full screen and half screen if you wish. So if things look small to you, you can always go to full screen mode and then convert back as needed. The session's being recorded. We will be taking questions at the end of the webinar. We're expecting to complete in about an hour and a half or less, and we'll have 30 minutes opened up for questions and answers at that time. If you do have a question, you can enter in the chat pod, and we will try to respond as we can. If for some reason we can't get to it during the presentations, we will get to it during the question and answer session. Okay? With that, I'd like to go ahead and start. Like I said, this is a webinar on the Highway Safety Manual. The purpose of the webinars is to introduce the Highway Safety Manual, content, concepts, and applications. Okay, by participating in these webinars, by no means is it going to make you an expert in the Highway Safety Manual. Here is the flyer, the second page of the flyer that was distributed some time back, listing the webinars. They begin today. And some of those people are, able to attend. Like I said, all the sessions are being recorded, so live sessions can go in and participate and view the recorded session. We will provide copies of the presentations at the end of each webinar. We will go to the waiting room where there will be a share pod with all of the files uploaded into the share pod, and you can download them from that particular pod. This is the list of webinars and the sequence of delivery. Today is the first one. It's the HSM Introduction, Content, and Overview. And then you can see the ones that follow. And most of them have to do with the applications of the Highway Safety Manual. When you get down to the final one, which is number 12, HSM Applications to the HSIP, that refers to the Highway Safety Improvement Program. And that particular module you get in is the crash prediction methods and the crash modification factors. Trouble advancing a slide here for some reason. Okay, sorry about that. Like I said, today's webinar is the first, and these are the presentations going to be made. Ray Kramus from our headquarters office will be touching on some of the HSM marketing and deployment initiatives that's available. Okay. With that, Ray, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gene, and good afternoon from the East Coast of the U.S. Good morning to those of you on the West Coast. In my presentation, I'll give the why should we use it rather than just continuing to use our current methods for highway safety analysis. So I'll start by trying to answer the question, what is the Highway Safety Manual? Basically, it's an AASHTO publication that'll be released within the next month or so. And it provides information and tools to conduct quantitative safety analyses. Use of these information and tools will facilitate explicit, by which we generally mean quantitative consideration of safety. Highway Safety Manual can support. One example is in scoping a project where determining what safety concerns should be addressed and which safety treatments should be considered as part of a project. In another phase of project development where you're considering design alternatives and selecting a preferred design alternative, the Highway Safety Throughout the webinar series, you'll see lots of examples of applications of the techniques in the manual for various parts of the planning, safety management, and project development process. The Highway Safety Manual has three main parts. So it's a compilation of methods. The first main part of the manual provides methods for developing an effective roadway safety management program and for evaluating the benefits of projects implemented through the program. Second main part provides predictive methods to estimate the crash frequency and severity that supports more project-level decision making. And urban and suburban arterials. And these methods enable you to estimate the effect on safety performance of varying roadway conditions and traffic volumes. I might note that research is underway right now to develop predictive methods for a fourth facility type, namely freeways and interstates. And then the third main part of the manual is a catalog of crash modification factors for estimating the effect of a variety of geometric and traffic operational treatments. For those of you who are familiar with the Highway Capacity Manual and have used the manual, it may be enlightening for you to think of the Highway Safety Manual as being akin to it, but for safety. That is, just as the Highway Capacity Manual is a compilation of information and analytical methods for estimating the capacity and operational performance of different highway facility types under specified roadway conditions and traffic volume levels, so too with specified roadway characteristics and traffic volumes. I think it's safe to say that the Highway Capacity Manual is the go-to source for quantitative information, for state-of-the-art information on capacity and operational performance of our highways. It's widely accepted and used in practice, and it's based on the best available science. It's regularly updated to reflect the latest research. Our goal is that in time, the Highway Safety Manual will gain the same sort of stature and be the go-to source for quantitative safety information and performance methods. As I'll explain in the next slide, the first edition of the Highway Safety Manual is science-based, and I've already mentioned that research is underway to expand upon the capabilities that we'll see in the first edition of the manual that will come out within the next month. The Highway Safety Manual is the product of a $7 million 10-year research program funded through the National Cooperative Highway Research Program with AASHTO and FHWA's participation as well. And I would note it builds upon the research activities in highway safety for at least the 20 years prior to this past 10-year period that has been focused on developing the Highway Safety Manual. Methods that are presented in the Safety Manual have been evolving for many years, and I would say reflect the state of good and common practice in the research community. The Highway Safety Manual is basically translating those methods and making them available for more widespread use in practice. Thousands of those results were approved for inclusion in the manual. So in addition to the NCHRP project panels that provide oversight of NCHRP research projects, the primary reviewing bodies have been both a TRB and an AASHTO task force devoted to the Highway Safety Manual. I dare say that there are very few details of the contents of the Highway Safety Manual that have not been vigorously debated before they were approved for inclusion in the manual. Now I want to move on to the second question, why we should consider using the Highway Safety Manual for decision-making in planning project development. First, I would say that we need quantitative estimates of safety performance for many of our planning and project development decisions. Second, I would argue that more reliable estimates of safety performance lead to more consistently safety cost-effective decisions. And the third reason or point that I'll discuss later in this presentation is that the estimation methods in the Highway Safety Manual are based upon good science and research results and move our current practice forward. First, I'll show some examples of some of the decisions that we make in planning, safety management, and project development that require or at least benefit from quantitative safety performance estimates. Early in roadway safety management, one of the first steps is the first bullet, which is identifying sites with the most potential for crash frequency or severity reduction. Then, whether a project is identified through a safety program or through some other program with some other funding source, quantitative analysis is beneficial in identifying crash patterns and treatments to address those patterns at particular roadway locations. It's always good after a project has been completed and treatments have been implemented to evaluate the effectiveness of those treatments in terms of crash reductions that were actually observed. And throughout the project development process, the last bullet is using tools such as the Highway Safety Manual, effects of a variety of quantifying safety facilitates trade-offs. Environmental impacts, right-of-way, routinely quantified and have been for like, which makes it harder to assess the objectively and evenly assess all of these factors. Is that it complements our existing design guidelines such as the AASHTO green or ranges of values for critical dimensions. And although I think it's not what the green that essentially equates being the recommended range of values as unsafe. Ezra Hauer, who's a leading highway safety researcher, labeled this notion or this shorthand as nominal safety. And substantive safety is essentially what the Highway Safety Manual methods evaluates. Let me try to expand on that contrast between nominal safety and substantive safety a bit. I want to emphasize that I think they're complementary. Being inside or outside of the AASHTO Green Book's recommended range of design dimensions certainly is an indicator of safety, but as this graph tries to illustrate, it's kind of a rough estimate of safety performance. The green line is a conceptual representation of how crash risk varies with design. The change in crash risk from just above to just below a recommended value for a design dimension is not as steep as the vertical face of the step function that represents shorter than the recommended value, or moving from a curve radius that equals the recommended minimum radius to one that's 1 foot shorter than the recommended minimum radius is not as abrupt as the nominal safety plot suggests. I think most of us would agree that the orange curvilinear line much more reasonably represents how crash risk varies with the dimensions of most design elements. In some cases, it would be steeper. In some cases, that curve may be flatter. And performance varies according to some curvilinear function in general as designed to change. radius shorter than the recommended minimum. But it also doesn't enable us to quantify the safety benefits of using radii larger than precisely the impacts of these kinds of changes in dimensions and design decisions that are faced in virtually every project. In subsequent seminars, you'll see lots of applications. So to summarize my first 2 points or reasons on why we should use the Highway Safety Manual, the availability of better safety analysis tools which produce more consistently reliable estimates of safety performance for decision making should lead to more consistently safety cost-effective investments. Is our bottom line, of course. I want to move next to the third of my 3 reasons for why we should use the Highway Safety Manual. Highway Safety Manual's primary measure of safety performance is expected average crash frequency. Variable. Making decisions in which there's uncertainty about the outcomes that result from our different choices, we should make decisions based upon expected values. There's certainly a lot of variability in the number of crashes that occur at a particular road. Facility. So I think it makes sense, and of course I took 30 years ago and statistical decision theory said that to make, that we should make our investment decisions based upon the best possible estimates we have of the expected value, in this case the expected safety performance of our choices, and in this case measured in terms of decisions on this notion of expected value. Before I move on to those examples, let's talk a little bit about some alternative ways we might estimate expected average crash frequency for a roadway segment or intersection with, the first is to use historic crash counts, which is our typical current practice, and in which we commonly look at the most recent 3 or 5 performance as part of a project scoping study. It's common to look at recent crash history. The Highway Safety Manual will enable us to improve the reliability of our quantitative safety estimates. Statistics is all about, and predictive methods are all about properly accounting for variability and uncertainty in outcomes and in estimating expected values, in this case. Third bullet, the third way to estimate is probably methods based on the statistical models presented in the Highway Safety Manual, where the two A key to why we should consider using the Highway Safety Manual is that its predictive methods apply the most appropriate counts don't address. These include bias, which if you're not familiar with that term, the second example I'll show will the main components of the Highway Safety Manual predictive methods are the four for a particular highway type, crash modification factors, which are used to estimate the effect just the safety performance functions to reflect the crash experience in the predictive model estimates to produce a final weighted estimated expected average crash frequency. Presentation, which is next, and in most of the remaining webinars, you'll my time on showing two examples to illustrate the limitations of relying solely on ability, and in terms of expected average crash frequency. The first example is crash counts from an almost 8-mile .9, and this year periods. Now, the average daily traffic on this point, and it has tended to increase over the time period we're going to look at. Generally, versus mile point during the years 1983 to 1985. Frequency, or at least not as reliably as we might. Um, 8, and then are high enough to suggest some potential concern, and that we ought to pay some additional 'and here, again, you might debate the significance of the spikes, but the highest frequency 5.9, and then at the end of the roadway, slightly different set of locations than if you looked only at. So the question is, which of these sets of counts gives the more reliable estimate of the true safety performance? One, and here there are spikes in crash. So these include some of the same locations as some of the previous 3-year periods that we looked at. Here, again, we have the biggest spike is around mile points 5 and 6.6. Your crash counts gives us good, reliable estimates of the true expected to focus your attention if you're scoping a 3R or a 4R project. Your periods to choose from. What I would argue, though, is that better than any one of these crash experience along the roadway for a 13-year period from 1983 to 1995. I think this influence of the character of the roadway. A lot of crashes are somewhat random in terms of where they and the characteristics of location becomes more pronounced the more years of data that you look at. There are challenges, of course, in collecting and interpreting crash counts for this long a period. Some states, for example, archive prior year crash data, and therefore it's hard to go back more than a few years. If you can obtain the data, then you need to do with the expected safety performance of a roadway. Good news is that the Highway Safety Manual's predictive methods are designed to help including accounting for the effect of changes in traffic volumes and roadway conditions on unexpected based on the characteristics of the roadway that influence them. Biomechanics for an analysis of injuries of the occupants of vehicles involved in utility pole crashes in a particular state. The horizontal direction rather than vertical. The horizontal represents the number of occupants of vehicles exposed state during the period 2003 to 2005, where at least 4 occupants were exposed to impact. You might consider these 50 should focus our attention. This next plot is for the same 57, but it's the same 57 locations. And what this shows on the horizontal axis is the change in the number of between 2003 and 2005. So the number of occupants exposed to impacts so what do you think happened between these two time periods? Perhaps you might guess that the state applied some no treatments were applied at these locations. Nothing systematically happened at these locations. Essentially, regression to the mean is the tendency for locations with higher than that is, for the number of crashes to regress to the mean. As well. This next plot represents the same data in a slightly different number of occupants exposed to utility impacts, and a few locations would have a lot. Occupants between 2003 and 2005, clearly above the average of what you would expect to the mean phenomenon, where you know, in the later time period. And what frequency and lead to suboptimal decisions. For example, it can lead us to select locations for safety, and lead us to overestimate or underestimate the benefit of investments at locations that short duration crash counts may lead us either to treat or to not treat. So, particularly in network screening and project scoping, it's important that we account for regression to the mean bias in our estimates of expected crash frequency. And again, fortunately, highway safety manual predictive methods do that. They apply appropriate statistical methods to address regression to the mean bias includes concludes my presentation. In summary, what I've tried to do is explain why we should consider using the highway safety. First, that we need quantitative estimates, and that the more reliable the estimates we have, the more consistently safety cost effective will be the decisions that we make. And I've tried to illustrate the limitations of current methods some of the statistical problems and the limitations of sole reliance on crash counts. Now, I know that I haven't explained the predictive methods in the Highway Safety Manual in any detail, so I'm going to turn the airwaves over to Gene Amparano. He's going to start providing some of the details of using the predictive methods in. I will try to work on some of the questions that I see have appeared in the chat.
Thank you, Ray. This next module will be on the Highway Safety Manual. Other webinars will not make you an expert in the Highway Safety Manual, but it'll give you a better understanding of what is in there and what the process is to follow. So the outcome is to describe the content of the forthcoming highway. Almost ready for distribution, expected to take place sometime in early July. Then we're going to introduce the crash prediction method that is in the Highway Safety Manual. So before we start, let's talk about what is in the Highway Safety Manual. Okay, what you'll see when you get a copy is that there's some of the fundamental concepts. Part B gets into the roadway safety management process. Part C modification factors, but once you receive a copy of the Highway Safety Manual, that name will be changed from accident modification factors. Is an introduction and overview. Second chapter is human factors, and the third chapter is on fundamentals, and we'll talk about the safety manual stated, and they'll give you an organization of the content. They'll give you the Highway Safety Manual, how it relates to the project development process, beginning with plan, which is human factors. There's a lot of discussion on the role of human factors in roadway safety. Talks about the driver characteristics and limitations. It talks about vision impairment. how those have a tendency to change among drivers. On the driver itself. And basically, for drivers, it gives them more room to make turning maneuvers as ramps along an interchange. Chapter 3, we get into the estimation methods that are presented in subsequent. Talks about and provides the definition of terms and terms that has a section that talks about the data that's the roadway safety management process. There's chapters economic appraisals in Chapter 7, prioritizations 8 and is the first step in the roadway safety crash frequency for an implemented safety countermeasure. Crash patterns. It provides an understanding of the crash pattern. Chapter 6 is selecting countermeasures. It's the third step. Reduce crash frequency or crash severity as specific countermeasures and identifies projects that are most cost-effective analysis. And both of these quantify the benefits or severity in monetary terms. Chapter 8 is prioritizing projects. It consists of presents 3 methods to prioritize projects. First method is on cost effectiveness. The second is on the cost-benefit analysis. And the third is on optimization, which is a way to determine the most cost-effective improvement that has to fit within a given budget. And the last and final step of the roadway safety management process is safety effectiveness. And that's evaluating the effectiveness of countermeasures at one or more sites. That consists of the roadway predictive methods, and it consists of 12 will be on rural multi-lane highways. And some of the factors, they all three recommend calibration for local conditions. And it will also be discussed in subsequent webinars. Roadway segments and intersections. They're developed or were developed from data from a number of similar sites. They were developed for specific sites, meaning for that particular roadway type. And in a couple of slides down the road, we will function of only a few variables, primarily traffic volume. They're used to calculate the expected crash frequency and crashes per year. Modification factors to either actual, if you're evaluating an existing project, difference between our base condition assumption. How can a crash prediction be used? In tort defense, if it's used properly. Countermeasures in projects. A crash prediction of an existing roadway and abnormally high or a lot higher than the predicted value, then that would have you can communicate the relative needs to the public, either of an existing project or a proposed project. Or the expected crash frequency for each of those alternatives. From a safety perspective, it can be used to communicate the safety within budget by selecting the countermeasures that are most effective. And if you have design exceptions, you can use a crash prediction to help or provide supporting documentation. From the tort defense perspective, it can be used as a tool to quantify the relative safety completely true, especially if you have some sort of prioritization that goes along with your policy. Part D of the Highway Safety Manual consists of crash modification factors. Intersections, Chapter 15, though limited, an at-grade intersection to a grade-separated interchange, modifying a two-lane merge diverge. What that is they have CMFs for railroad highway grade crossings, which consist of installed. And there's only a couple of CMFs for work zones, and it has to do with the duration, the time. Works, crash modification factors for those. So a crash modification factor, like I said earlier, they're used to adjust the calculated value or crash frequency using the safety performance function value for base conditions to either actual or proposed conditions. So a CMF of 1 means that that particular safety countermeasure meets base conditions, or the treatment has no effect on the expected crash frequency. If your CMF is less than 1, then we would expect that the treatment would reduce the crash frequency, and if the CMF is greater than 1, then we would expect that the treatment would have an increase in expected crash frequency. So with that, we're going to talk briefly about the safety performance functions and crash modification factors for rural two-lane roadway segments. We don't have time to cover them all. That will be covered in a subsequent chapter. But just to give you a feel of what we're talking about, we're going to go ahead and show you the SPF, or the safety performance function, for base conditions for a rural two-lane roadway segment. And this is it. Whereas your NSPF is your predicted, this is total crash frequency. We need are the traffic volume, the AADT, which is the average annually, daily traffic volume of vehicles per day, and then the length of the roadway segment in miles. What are the base conditions for the SPFs? The base conditions is when the CMF, or the crash modification factor, is equal to a value of 1.0. And these are the design characteristics on traffic control elements. Roadside hazard rating is 3, and we don't have time to discuss that, what a roadside hazard rating is, but that is presented in the module on two-lane rural road segments in a couple of days. Driveway density, we're assuming that the driveway density is 5 or less driveways per mile. Grade, while there's almost for 1.0 being grades that are equal to or less than 3%. Horizontal curves, we're assuming no horizontal curves, no vertical curves. We're assuming that there's not the presence of centerline rumble strips, two-way left turn lanes, climbing or passing lanes, gliding, and there's no automated speed enforcement. So these are base conditions where the CMF, or the crash modification factor, is equal to 1.0. To account for the difference from our base conditions to either our actual or proposed conditions, and it's just the total predicted crashes is equal to our CMFs, which is CMF 1R through XR, whatever CMFs are applicable to our project, times the number of crashes that we calculated using our safety performance function. CR is a calibration factor that can be used to calibrate our expected frequency of crashes to local conditions. Some of the crash modification factors are more of a function rather than a factor, and this is one, for example. This is the crash modification factor for lane width. You can see that there's two variables that we need to come up with in order to calculate the crash modification factor for. Well, the CMF RA we get from Exhibit 10.4, which is the CMF for lane width, and it's a function of lane width and traffic volume. So, for example, if we have a lane width over in the left of 10 feet and our traffic volume is greater than 2,000 vehicles per day, A is our proportion of crashes that are related to lane width. And those are noted in the note that's at the bottom of the exhibit. Those are single vehicle. Default value is 0.574 or 57.4% of crashes. And this is an example where the Highway Safety Manual does have default values. And it is recommended in the Highway Safety Manual that the default values be replaced with actual values if they're available in your transportation agency. Here's an example of a crash modification factor that is a crash modification factor. It's not a function, it's not a calculation, and it's for installing centerline rumble crashes on rural two-lane roads with a traffic volume of 5 Now briefly, we're going to look at the safety performance functions and cross modification factors in intersections that have safety performance functions. The first one is a three-legged stop-controlled intersection, which is a 3ST. Second is a four-legged and they're all very similar. They all volume on the major road, which is the ADT subscript MAJ, and a function of the traffic volume on the minor road. Base conditions for rural two-lane intersection. In other words, that the intersections are 90 degrees to each other. In the same way that we applied the CMFs to the conditions, and we use the crash modification factors to adjust for individual design elements within modification factor for intersections on two-lane rural roads at CMF as the absolute value of the difference between 90 degrees and the actual intersection angle itself. So if you have a three-legged stop-controlled intersection, or only stop-controlled intersections, there's not a CMF for skew angle at signalized intersections. It's assumed that the signal itself here's a crash modification factor. Again, it's just a factor. No calculations required. It's for the presence of left turn lanes. And it's hold on a minute, folks. I lost my presentation. Try to retrieve it. There, it's back. I don't know what happened to it. So, for example, is 0.56. And if you had a four-legged intersection that was signalized and you had left turn lane, and the way you bring it all together is for your intersections individually. Process will be gone through in detail. So with that, we talked briefly about the content that's going to be in the Highway Safety Manual when it comes out. Some of the exhibits and process and the values for crash modification factors, to our understanding, have not changed. We also that completes the overview content and the discussion on predictive methods. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Esther to talk about deployment initiatives.
Thank you, Gene. Good afternoon, everybody. This is going to be a quick overview of the Office of Safety as we were given an opportunity to make sure that HSM and the analysis tools are being deployed throughout the country as best as possible. Part of the initiatives involved training. Another part of it was technical assistance, but the first part that we were tasked with was actually marketing HSM. We worked together with AASHTO and came up with a great, I could say, branding of the actual letters. It changed from the initial, I guess if everyone saw that logo initially, this is a little bit of a different, and I think it's a better logo. With our deployment activities, we are also going to take on technical assistance and data support. You'll be able to outreach to our GDL lab, which is a geometric design lab. You'll be able to get to it through AASHTO. That's going to be our first line, and whatever questions that they may or may not be able to help you with, we'll certainly step up and help. The training which this is a part of was developed through a project with TRB. It's called NCHRP 1738. Several of you may have taken it. It's a 2-day training course. We're also developing several other training initiatives that I'll discuss later on in the presentation. We also are in the process of developing an implementation plan on the national and the state level that is going to be something to help out the states with plans of their own, something that we're going to get feedback or input from several lead states that actually be able to tell what they've been doing so far to implement HSM. The actual implementation plan is going to be a roadmap that not only has the implementation strategies, but also some additional case studies. We're looking to have input from several leaders in HSM that have been involved with the AASHTO Joint Task Force, also TRB's task force, to get additional information from them on some things that they're doing in their states. So far, we've also had the opportunity to work with TRB and AASHTO on the marketing plan, and we're using some products that we've developed. There's a brochure that's going to be posted on AASHTO's website. There's going to be a fact sheet. Also, we've already finished the primer that's going to be going out with the HSM that will be delivered early July. We're going to cross our fingers and hope that's the deadline we're meeting. There's also an initiative going on through TRB that's going to be a lead state initiative, and we're going to help support that. One of the first things that we realized was training is going to be imperative to make sure that the HSM is implemented. Right now, there's training that's available through NHI with a IHSDM, that's the Interactive Highway Safety Design Model, Safety Analyst, which is actually AASHTO's, available through AASHTO, where you can actually take a course called Using Safety Analyst once you're licensed. There's new approaches to safety analysis that's been available for a while now, and it's in the process of being updated because some of the things in it are outdated. But IHSDM is supporting, I have this confused. It should be IHDSM supports Part C and Safety Analyst supports Part D. So make that mental note in your head. But both of those software tools that support HSM have training courses to go along with them. We're experiencing the HSM webinars right now, and these are being recorded, and they'll also be available on AASHTO's website when the series is complete, and they'll be repeated again. We also have the safety effects of geometric design, which once the HSM is actually in everyone's hands early July, they'll change the name to HSM practitioners courses, and then it'll cover 2-lane rural roads and also multi-lane roads. Those two areas are also going to be covered in the 2-hour seminars later on this summer. Well, I think it'll be next week. And Gene mentioned that in his presentation also. We also have a crash modification factors clearinghouse, and it's a training course that you can take online, and that supports Part D of the actual HSM. Okay, I want to go back to the marketing plan. We were partnering with AASHTO and TRB early on to develop the marketing plan, and several of the strategies that we developed were updating the highwaysafetymanual.org. That website is up and running as a static website right now, but they're also going to launch a new website once the manual is published. We've already developed the primer. You'll be receiving a copy of the primer along with the HSM, at least the first 10 free copies that everyone will receive as far as the member states are concerned. The fact sheet and the brochure are going to be posted on AASHTO's website. They'll also be available in electronic form with an HSM suite that we're working on along with the implementation plan. Trade article was already developed, and ITE Journal is going to have that article in it for the June issue, so you should be able to get a copy of that pretty soon. Some long-term marketing initiatives that we have along with the implementation plan is to develop case studies, and there are several case studies that we have that we were using for the training, but we want to get fresh ones once people actually implement HSM and adopt them in their states so that we can use that as another marketing point. We're going to establish a community of practice in the future for those users who may actually have good feedback for us to feed into the second edition of the HSM, and there will be outreach through at AASHTO through FHWA continuously to make sure that the implementation goes successfully. Like I said, outreach is going to be one of those initiatives that's going on or ongoing throughout the implementation phase for the next couple of years. The website will be launched through AASHTO. There'll be a peer exchange later on this year planned for Chicago, maybe in November. We haven't gotten a firm date on that, but keep your ears and eyes posted to the hsm.org in order to get additional information on that. We, of course, are encouraging our software, supporting software to be used. Safety Analyst is doing well. AASHTO's taking the lead on that IHSDM, which just released a beta version, a new version of 2010 version that has additional capabilities. And I think for Clayton Chin's group, they just had a webinar that I participated in early June to give additional information to improve the safety for all of our projects. We are going to be presenting executive briefings throughout the year. I think we just came back from Spain, and there was some talk there of HSM, so it's a very exciting time for us. For technical assistance, AASHTO is going to be the first line of defense for AASHTO is going to be the first line of defense for safety analysts since they've had that since February of this year. There's also an opportunity to get technical assistance for IHSDM through Clayton Chin's group with the Geometric Design Lab. And also the community of practice will be a place where you can ask questions and get additional technical assistance. Data support's available for safety analysts through AASHTO. We also can take a look at it internally. Federal Highways has a project called CDIP, which stands for Crash Data Improvement Program, where states can ask for additional help to look at their data to make sure it's input that you're putting in for the safety analyst and make sure that it's up to snuff. We also are encouraging a Meyer as a kind of soft requirement. It won't be anything mandated from Congress, but it is something that they're looking at for reauthorization. So we're all very willing to help you improve your data systems, and we want to make sure that that's not a stumbling block for people to implement HSM. Thanks. Okay, go. Just want to talk a little bit about the clearinghouse too. There's a whole myriad of data that's available at the clearinghouse as far as CMFs are concerned. We want to make sure that people are going there to get their information on education, the online course. There's also a place there for you to input new CMFs. There's a nice list of CMFs that go along with the HSM. That's for Part D. And they have their own website at the cmfclearinghouse.org. They're going to be updated regularly. Want to make sure that people know that we're adding to the list continuously, and that the second edition of the Highway Safety Manual will have even more crash modification factors that's available. They're going through a rigorous qualification. There's a star rating that's associated with it, and the ones that are there on the website, you can tell which ones have actually been approved to put in the Highway Safety Manual. We also want to let you know that the ones that are available for Highway Safety Manual are the best ones for now, but we're relying on states to come up with additional information for us to add even more CMFs, and we realize people really are looking forward to having that as a resource. Okay, and I think that's it for me. I want to see, we're going to move over to questions, so Jean, you can proceed with the next section.
Okay, thank you, Esther. With that, we will open up the webinar for questions. Operator, Rico?
Thank you, sir. And at this time, if you would like to ask an audio question, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. When recording your name, please wait until the messenger prompts you. To withdraw your question, please press star 2. Once again, if you would like to ask an audio question at this time, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. When recording your name, please wait until the messenger prompts you. To withdraw your question, please press star 2. One moment, please, as I get the first question.
While we're waiting for questions, I went to the wrap-up room. You can see a file share pod with all the presentations. You can download them from the file share pod by clicking on them. When the new browser window opens up, then just click on it to download.
And our first question comes from Mr. John Haberman. Your line is open, sir.
Yes. As an example, the retroreflectivity guide suggested a regional study to help with the management practices. Is there a way to take the Highway Safety Manual and use it to base a regional study for your geographic positive or negative on what the...
Use the Highway Safety Manual to
create regional factors.
To develop regional factors?
Yes.
You could, and that would probably be done through your calibration process. You would calibrate, and there's a whole step process that we'll get into when we get into the other webinars that talks about the calibration process, but also well defined in Part C of the Highway Safety Manual in the appendix that describes a calibration process where you can use predictive values from the Highway Safety Manual and then calibrate them for regional conditions. So yes, I think that's very doable.
Very good. Okay, thank you.
Like to ask an audio question at this time, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. When recording your name, please wait until the messenger prompts you to record your name. One moment, please.